Glace Chase, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So let's start a little bit about your story. What was it like growing up here in Australia, and how did it shape your interest as a performer?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I grew up in country Victoria, actually, in a very, very small rural community, a town of 1,000 people. And how did it shape me? Well, I guess it, like many of us, it shaped me in the sense of wanting to get I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here.
You are quite allowed to swear.
It shaped me as I wanted to get the fuck out. And I did get the fuck out, first to Melbourne and then the world. Yeah.
All right, excellent. So at the moment, you're based in New York after finding plenty of success here in Australia, I must admit. What drove you to make this move, and how does it contrast living in New York as opposed to here in Australia?
It's funny you asked that. I guess I initially, when I moved to New York, which would have been 8-9 years ago, I moved because I wanted to figure out if I was trans or not, really. And I didn't feel I could do it in the fishbowl that is Australia. And little did I know that question would actually be quite a difficult one that took me quite a few more years to figure out. And in that time, New York really became my home. I mean, I'm a colorful, eccentric personality, and being trans is a part of that, but also, too, I'm just a nut job in and of my own right. And New York, I feel, is like a city that could actually hold me. And so it was a delightful thing, I think, to realize that, that in New York I can still cut through. People still notice me in New York. That was a clarifying thing for me. So New York is home.
So let's move on to TRIPLEX, your new play.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe it to someone who's interested in going and see it?
So in a sentence, TRIPLEX is about a straight Wall Street banker who has an affair with a trans performer and his family finding out the day before he gets married.
You mentioned in your notes that this is a story about men and toxic masculinity, and this shows through in many ways throughout the show. But it's a little bit more nuanced than that, isn't it? Covering a lot of different interleaving themes, but it does follow pretty strongly the story of Scott, your main cis male lead. What was your thinking behind making the story about a trans-cis relationship about a cis main character?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm glad you asked it. You're the first person that's really gone near it. I'd like to say it was fully intentional to begin with, but the truth of the matter is, Paige, who directed it, who's a close friend, when the idea started, I couldn't even conceive of a world where a trans person could be the lead character. And I just automatically went, well, it has to be about him because it's my history. That's why I pretty much left the industry, as in I was never going to work and no one was interested. So it was a bit of a shock for me to discover that maybe that is no longer the case. That said, I still strongly back my decision that he is the lead character. I think... I know some people might disagree with me, and I understand why, but I do believe in an open kind of conversation, and I think that cis men that are interested in trans women really do go through a lot, and that is part of the trans narrative, and without actually highlighting that, then actually, trans women are marginalized in a way because of that. If a romantic relationship is not seen equally between two parties, then you've just sort of glorified the trans person. I call it the excuse me, I'm about to say the tranny word, but the magical tranny trope. That you can see a lot of, where you're so special and heightened, but you cease to be a human. And so it was really important for me to actually detail that relationship, a type of relationship I've had many, I've experienced quite a lot, and to actually trace the dynamic of his shame and his complexity, because it affects me and us girls too. And I think it's important to actually be empathetic and actually tell that story with some detail and some complexity.
Okay, I think I might get you to expand out on that a little bit.
Oh, there you go.
So, on the surface, there's quite a lot of comedy elements to this particular show, and it is quite a funny show as well. But it does seem that the takeaway of the story it conveys around non-traditional relationships in a sort of negative and bleak sort of fashion. Is there more than this to this particular story? Is there a little bit of hope out there for these sorts of relationships?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I understand if there's pushback on that. What can I say? Life's hard, shit's hard, and I'm sorry. But, if you're a trans woman that's interested in men, you know all too well that shit's real and shit hurts and shit mostly doesn't go your way. And sorry if I'm stating the truth of that, but in my life, I think I know one person that was in a trans, like a guy, like a cis guy and a trans girl. I know one that was publicly out about it. One. So I don't know. Is there hope? I guess I feel like in this story, maybe this story is a part of that healing narrative that people can actually see this and go, well, that's not right. And why should these guys be made to feel such shame and then shame themselves and then the trans women that they're into? Maybe it's part of a conversation that can help shift the needle a little bit.
So the play also touches on a few themes around wealth inequality and gun rights and people who have freedoms and don't have freedoms in society based on their standing, borrowing quite heavily on American culture. Now, it does translate into other Western cultures reasonably well, but was there a specific intent in choosing an American framing for this particular set of themes?
Well, I live in New York, and I've lived in New York for nearly a decade, and the play is set in Tribeca, which is an area that I work a lot in, the financial district. Basically, I was just trying to tell a story that was truthful to my life, and the story is pretty much my story. So it was never conscious to deal with American themes per se, but those are the themes that I live with.
In this season that you're playing at the moment, you're playing the lead role as Dexy, which you also mention is a reflection of you in many ways. It is, however, unusual to find many trans people in lead roles in mainstream film and other...
Right.
And even with even when the characters they are portraying are trans themselves, is it important that stories about trans experiences are expressed by trans people, or is it okay for cis actors to play those sorts of roles?
I have quite strong feelings on this, and I feel like if you're gonna deal with our cool, because there's no doubt that trans is kind of cool, then we deserve a piece of the damn pie. I am tired of people taking my story and my fellow trans people's stories and not giving us, some of a cut of that pie. So absolutely, trans people should play trans roles, and if you're going to tell a trans story, you better have a highly key trans creatives in there, or at least me as the originating artist, as the writer, and as the lead, as the romantic lead. Clearly, my thumbprints are all over this work, but absolutely, I feel very strongly about it, and if you want. As I kind of alluded to, trans people, we struggle so much, and there's so much income inequality and whatnot. We deserve to be included, and if you're gonna get all the cool from telling our stories, we should actually get a piece of that pie. Yeah.
All right, so let's go on to the struggles of the LGBTIQ community for a bit. The community in the modern era is a theme in your work, not just this piece, but in other pieces that have come before. What are your thoughts around the movement today, and where do you think you see it going in the next few years?
The LGBT movement or the trans movement?
The LGBTIQ movement.
Okay. Do you know what? Honestly, Like the play, Dexy, my character, is quite, I call her delightfully amoral and quite unpolitical. She has quite a few rants in the piece about, political culture. And in a way, I'm probably slightly more political than Dexy, but not much. I don't really focus on rights all that much personally. I understand why people do, but it's just not the way I enjoy processing my life. I'm a bit more of a rock and roll hippie. I enjoy connecting, and I think what is exciting me right now, I mainly work in straight bars in New York, and I'm around a lot of very different people. I think what's exciting me, what I'm seeing on the street, is more just general awareness, understanding of, say, a trans person, a trans experience, and also being treated slightly less like a freak. So maybe that would be nice if that keeps happening. Long may it continue. Yeah.
Okay, so in your notes, you also mentioned that these characters might have a bit of a comeback in the future, which could be quite interesting. What would you like to say with these characters if you were to take them forward?
Well, yeah, Scotty and Dexy, they're great thwarted romance. I don't know, I want to see the way life plays out. I guess Dexy in the play is quite, and Dexy is sort of based on me, I think, 3 years ago. And I was in a fairly lost space, and Dexy is as well. I think, ironically, this play having such a massive, season like Queensland Theatre, then Sydney Theatre Company at the Sydney Opera House, where we're nearly sold out. It's giving me a lot of opportunities I never thought would happen, and so I want to give it a little bit more time before I revisit Dexy and see where she's at with her life. But I also, too, know that our Wall Street banker, Scotty, will also, who is getting married tomorrow, he will have had, I have a sense of where his life will be, and I think putting those two characters back in a collision course could be really interesting.
Glace Chase, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.